Case 1. Elizabeth Escalona. September 2011. Dallas, Texas. There are moments in the history of a community when a single case stops everything. When the weight of what has been uncovered becomes almost too much to carry. When even seasoned investigators, people who have spent years working in the most difficult corners of law enforcement, find themselves standing in silence. Not because they lack the words, but because the words themselves feel inadequate. The case of Elizabeth Escalona was one of those moments for the city of Dallas, Texas. It was a case that would go on to spark national conversations about child welfare, about the warning signs that communities miss, about the systems that are supposed to protect the most vulnerable among us, and about what justice truly looks like when the person responsible for a child's safety is the very person who caused them the most harm. To understand the full weight of what unfolded in September of 2011, you first have to understand the world that 2-year-old Jocelyn Cedillo lived in. She was just a toddler, a little girl at the very beginning of her life. She was learning to walk, learning to speak, learning to trust the people around her. And the person she trusted most, the person she depended on for food, for comfort, for safety, was her mother. Her name was Elizabeth Escalona. She was 23 years old. She was the mother of 5 children. And on a September day that would change the course of Texas legal history, she committed an act against her own daughter that would leave an entire nation asking the same haunting question. How does something like this happen? According to court testimony and police investigation records, the events of that day began with frustration. Escalona, by the accounts presented in court, had become overwhelmed with the process of potty training her toddler daughter. What happened next was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was not a single act of frustration. What investigators documented was a systematic and escalating series of actions that resulted in injuries so severe that the child was hospitalized in critical condition. Dallas Police Senior Corporal Abel Lopez, who was among the first investigators to speak with Escalona following the incident, described the scene and the evidence he collected in explicit detail during the sentencing proceedings. The evidence he brought into that courtroom included a bottle of adhesive, the kind commonly sold in hardware and convenience stores, and a section of the apartment wall. On that section of wall, investigators had found something that would become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in Dallas County criminal history: the tiny handprints of a 2-year-old child, pressed into the surface by the very adhesive her mother had used to restrain her. But before Jocelyn was restrained against that wall, she had already endured an assault that left her with injuries that shocked every medical professional who examined her. According to testimony from prosecutors and medical witnesses, Escalona had kicked her daughter in the stomach. She had struck her with a milk jug. And then, in an act that Dallas County Prosecutor Aaron Price described in court as the behavior of someone who had crossed a line that no parent should ever cross, Escalona applied the adhesive to her daughter's hands and pressed them against the wall, leaving the child suspended, helpless, and in extraordinary pain. When Jocelyn was finally discovered and brought to medical professionals, the full scope of what she had endured became devastatingly clear. The injuries documented included a fractured rib. There was documented bleeding within her brain, an injury so serious that physicians worked urgently to stabilize her condition. There were bite marks on her body. The medical team that treated Jocelyn described her injuries as consistent with what they would expect to see in cases of prolonged and severe child abuse. She was a 2-year-old child who had been subjected to harm that no human being, let alone a small child, should ever have to survive. Jocelyn did survive, and that survival became one of the central focuses of the prosecution's case. Aaron Price, the lead prosecutor, stood before the court and held up images taken of Jocelyn's injuries. She looked at Elizabeth Escalona directly and asked her whether a monster had done this. According to ABC News reporting from the trial, Escalona nodded and replied, yes. Price told the court in plain and unambiguous terms, only a monster glues her daughter's hands to the wall. The trial itself unfolded in ways that revealed the full complexity of the circumstances surrounding Escalona's life. Her defense attorneys presented testimony from a counselor named Melanie Davis, who described sessions she had conducted with Escalona and stated that her client genuinely loved all 5 of her children. Her family members, her mother and her sister, appeared in court and wept as they pleaded with the judge to show leniency. They described a young woman who had grown up in a household where violence and substance abuse were common features of daily life. They described a mother who, in their view, had been shaped by circumstances beyond her control. Tapes were played in court showing Escalona as a teenager making threats that prosecutors used to paint a picture of someone with a long history of anger and instability. The prosecution also described her as a former gang member. Elizabeth Escalona herself took the stand during the sentencing phase. What she said in that courtroom has been reported by multiple news outlets and remains one of the most striking moments of the entire proceeding. She told the judge that she was no longer the person who had done what she had done. She told the court that she would never forgive herself for what she had inflicted on her own daughter. But her expressions of remorse, however sincere or otherwise, could not undo what had been done. They could not unfracture a rib. They could not uninjure a child's brain. They could not erase the handprints on the wall. State District Judge Larry Mitchell had heard every word of the 5-day sentencing hearing. He had reviewed the photographs. He had listened to the medical testimony. He had considered the arguments of both sides. And when he rose to deliver his sentence, he was unsparing in his assessment of what Elizabeth Escalona had done. In words that would be reported by news organizations across the country, Judge Mitchell told Escalona, "On September 7, 2011, you savagely subjected your child to harm that brought her to the edge of death. For this, you must be punished." The sentence he handed down was 99 years in prison. The reaction in the courtroom was immediate and overwhelming. Family members sobbed loudly. Some collapsed. Escalona herself showed little visible emotion as the sentence was announced. Prosecutors had sought 45 years, meaning Judge Mitchell had gone well beyond what even the state had asked for. Legal commentators speaking to the Houston Press and the HuffPost in the days that followed noted that the sentence was exceptionally severe, and that it appeared to be a deliberate message. Barry Sorrells, a Dallas defense attorney speaking to HuffPost, said that the facts of a child abuse case can sometimes be so extreme, so deeply aggravated, that a sentence approaching life becomes not only justifiable but necessary. Erin Price, speaking after the verdict, said she had never encountered a case with a collection of injuries that she believed constituted child harm of this nature. The case drew national attention in part because of the specifics of what had happened, the adhesive, the wall, the tiny handprints, but also because of the broader conversation it ignited about child safety in Texas. At the time of the trial, multiple news organizations reported that Texas led the country in child fatalities resulting from abuse and neglect. The Escalona case, according to legal observers, sent a signal that Dallas County courts were prepared to treat child abuse with the same severity that the crimes themselves demanded. Defense attorneys announced their intention to appeal the sentence, arguing that 99 years was disproportionately harsh for a case in which the victim survived. Under Texas law, Escalona would be eligible for parole after 30 years. As of the last confirmed reporting, she remains incarcerated. Jocelyn Cedillo, the little girl at the center of this case, was placed in the care of her grandmother, Ophelia Escalona, following her recovery. Physicians expected her to make a full physical recovery. The other 4 children, including an infant who had been born that same year, were also placed in the grandmother's care. In the months and years that followed, advocates for child welfare pointed to Jocelyn's case as a reason to strengthen reporting systems, expand access to mental health services for young parents, and increase funding for child protective services programs across the state. What Jocelyn endured at the age of 2 should never have been possible. The systems that exist to protect children, the neighbors, the family members, the social service networks, are only as strong as the attention and resources we give them. Every child deserves to be safe in their own home. Every child deserves to be protected. And when that protection fails, justice, however imperfect, must answer. This case is documented in the public records of Dallas County. It has been covered extensively by NBC DFW, ABC News, and the HuffPost. The 99-year sentence handed down by Judge Larry Mitchell in October of 2012 remains one of the longest ever handed down in a Texas child abuse case involving a surviving victim. If you or someone you know suspects a child is experiencing abuse or neglect, please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. The line is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and is completely confidential. Before we continue, Cold Case Time is committed to covering cases like this one, not to sensationalize them, but to make sure the victims are never forgotten, and that the lessons their stories carry reach as many people as possible. If this kind of responsible, in-depth true crime journalism matters to you, please take a moment right now to like this video. Every subscribe helps ensure that stories like Jocelyn's are heard by the widest possible audience. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a case. This work only happens because of your support. Case 2, Dealey Root Year. June 6, 1996. Rowlett, Texas, a suburb of Dallas. Rowlett, Texas is the kind of place that people move to specifically because of how safe it feels. Quiet streets lined with well-kept homes. Cul-de-sacs where children play in the evenings. Good schools. A strong community. It is the kind of suburb that generations of Dallas area families have chosen because they want their children to grow up feeling protected, feeling loved, feeling like the world is a fundamentally decent place. On the morning of June 6, 1996, that sense of safety was shattered in a way that the community of Rowlett has never fully recovered from. What happened at 5801 Eagle Drive in the early hours of that June morning would become one of the most analyzed, most debated, and most haunting cases in the history of North Texas, and arguably in the history of American criminal justice. At 2:31 in the morning, the 911 dispatch center in Rowlett received a call. On the other end of the line was a 26-year-old woman named Dealey Root Year. Her voice was frantic. She was screaming. "Oh my God, who would do this?" she cried. "Somebody came in here. They just stabbed me and my children." In the background, dispatchers could hear the sounds of chaos, panic, distress, the unmistakable urgency of someone in the middle of an unfolding nightmare. The call lasted approximately 5 minutes and 42 seconds. By the time police arrived, within 3 minutes of the call being made, they found a scene that Rowlett Police Lieutenant David Neighbors, then the crime scene supervisor, would later say he knew immediately was going to be one of the most significant cases of his career. 6-year-old Devin Root Year and 5-year-old Damon Root Year were found with severe stab wounds inflicted with devastating force. Devin had been stabbed twice in the chest with such power that the blade had penetrated nearly all the way through his body. Damon had sustained multiple stab wounds to his back. Devin was already gone when officers arrived. Damon was still alive, barely, when paramedics reached him, but he did not survive the ambulance ride to the hospital. Both boys had been asleep on the downstairs family room floor when, according to Dealey Root Year's account, the attack had begun. Dealey herself had sustained injuries to her throat and her right arm. A necklace she had been wearing was so deeply pressed into her neck during the attack that it had to be surgically removed. Physicians later testified that the wound to her throat had come within 2 millimeters of her carotid artery. She was hospitalized, treated, and released within a few days. Her husband, Darren Root Year, had been asleep upstairs with their infant son, Drake. Neither was harmed. The house on Eagle Drive had 3 occupants upstairs that night who did not experience the violence, and 2 young boys downstairs who did not survive it. Dealey's account to investigators was detailed and consistent in its broad strokes. She had fallen asleep on the couch while watching television with Devin and Damon. She had awakened to the presence of a man in her home. A cut window screen in the garage appeared to indicate a possible entry point for an intruder. A bloody sock was later discovered in an alley approximately 75 yards from the home, containing blood from both boys. These pieces of evidence became the foundation of Dealey's defense. Evidence, her attorneys argued, that proved an intruder had entered and fled the scene. But investigators noticed things that did not align. The flower beds outside the garage window, the supposed entry point, were undisturbed. The windowsill had an unbroken layer of dust, including on the cut window. No blood was found in the garage, which an intruder fleeing through would almost certainly have left. The valuables left openly on the kitchen counter, watches, rings, had not been taken, despite the supposed motive of burglary. And the murder weapon was a knife that had come from the Root Year's own kitchen block. Forensic analysis became the turning point of the investigation. Blood spatter experts testified that the pattern of drops found in the kitchen was consistent with someone who had been standing still, not chasing after a fleeing attacker. Blood spatter found on the back shoulder of Dealey's nightshirt was, according to prosecution experts, consistent with the motion of someone delivering repeated stab wounds, not someone who had been attacked. The puncture wounds in the fabric of her shirt did not align with the wounds on her body, suggesting the shirt may have been deliberately stabbed. And forensic analysts found evidence of fiberglass rods on a bread knife in the kitchen that matched the fiberglass from the cut window screen in the garage, suggesting the screen had been cut from inside the house, not outside. San Antonio Chief Medical Examiner Vincent DeMaio testified that the wound to Darley's throat was not consistent with the self-inflicted injuries he had examined throughout his career. However, her own treating physicians had initially told investigators the wounds might have been self-inflicted. The contradictory medical testimony would become one of many points of dispute in a case already dense with conflicting interpretations. 13 days after Devin and Damon lost their lives, Darley Routier was arrested and charged with capital murder. The trial was moved to Kerrville, Texas, due to the overwhelming pretrial media coverage in the Dallas area. It became a national sensation. Prosecutors argued that Darley had staged the entire scene, that financial difficulties facing the Routier family, including over $22,000 in debt, had motivated her to do the unthinkable. They portrayed her as someone who had become resentful of the demands of motherhood, someone who, in the words used during the proceedings, was no longer the glamorous center of attention she wanted to be. Then came the evidence that many observers believe shaped the jury's perception more than any forensic detail, a videotape. 13 days after her sons lost their lives, Darley Routier was filmed at their graveside, spraying silly string and appearing to laugh and celebrate what was framed as Devin's birthday. The tape was shown to the jury. The defense argued strenuously that it had been edited and taken out of context, that the full video showed Darley also weeping and grieving, but the damage to her public image was, by many accounts, irreparable. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Darley Routier of the capital murder of Damon on February 1, 1997. 3 days later, she was sentenced to death by lethal injection. She was transported to the Patrick O'Daniel unit in Gatesville, Texas, the facility that houses women sentenced to death under Texas law. In the nearly 3 decades since that sentence was handed down, the case of Darley Routier has never been fully resolved in the court of public opinion. A book written by Kathy Cruz of the Hood County News, titled Dateline Purgatory, raised serious questions about the reliability of the evidence and the fairness of the investigation. Private investigator Richard Reyna revealed that Darren Routier had admitted to asking his stepfather-in-law about staging a fake burglary at the house months before the tragedy, a detail that introduced an entirely new layer of complexity into the already labyrinthine case. A fingerprint found on the garage windowsill was confirmed in 2002 not to belong to any member of the Routier family, though forensic experts debated whether it could be linked to Darley. Defense attorneys pointed out the near impossibility of the prosecution's timeline, arguing that the duration of the 911 call alone made it logistically impossible for Darley to have committed the acts she was accused of, staged the scene, planted the sock in the alley, cut the window screen, and inflicted wounds on herself. As of 2024, Darley Routier remains on death row at the Patrick O'Daniel unit in Gatesville, Texas. No execution date has been set. Her attorneys continue to pursue appeals and DNA testing that they believe could change the outcome of her case. She has maintained her innocence every single day for nearly 30 years. Devin and Damon Routier were 6 and 5 years old when they lost their lives in their own home. Whatever the full truth of this case, and the debate shows no sign of ending, those 2 little boys deserved to grow up. They deserved long lives. They deserved to be safe in the house where they fell asleep that night. Their story is a reminder that the justice system, however carefully constructed, is not infallible, and that in cases of this magnitude, the pursuit of truth must never stop, no matter how many years have passed. This case is documented extensively in Texas court records and has been covered by NBC DFW, WFAA, CNN, Texas Monthly, and numerous national publications. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice confirms Darley Routier's continued presence on death row. If this case raises questions for you about how the justice system handles capital punishment, we encourage you to seek out the many documentaries and investigative reports that have examined the Routier case in depth. Knowledge and awareness are the foundations of a just society. Important cases like this one means something to you. Please take a moment to like this video right now Tap the notification bell so you're always the first to know when we release a new documentary. Your support is what makes this work possible, and every single subscriber matters. Case 3. Andrea Yates. June 20th, 2001. Clear Lake City, Houston, Texas. Before we examine the details of what happened on June 20th, 2001, it is important to establish something clearly. The case of Andrea Yates is not simply a story about a single act of devastating harm. It is a story about systemic failure. It is a story about what happens when the warning signs of a severe mental health crisis are dismissed, minimized, or ignored. It is a story about a broken support system, about a medical community that did not intervene aggressively enough, and about a family living under pressures that should never have been allowed to build to the point that they did. None of that context removes accountability from the chain of events that followed, but it makes those events impossible to understand without it. Andrea Pia Kennedy was born on July 2, 1964, in Houston, Texas. By all accounts, she was an exceptional student, class valedictorian, captain of the swim team, an honors graduate who went on to study nursing. She was, by every external measure, a person of remarkable capability and discipline. She married Russell Yates in April of 1993. Their first child, Noah, was born in February of 1994. 3 more boys followed: John in 1995, Paul in 1997, and Luke in February of 1999. The family was devoutly religious. They were committed to a vision of large family life that was, in many ways, a reflection of deep personal conviction. But the pregnancy that brought Luke into the world also brought the first devastating break in Andrea Yates's mental health. Later in 1999, following Luke's birth, she attempted to end her own life twice. She was hospitalized. She was diagnosed with postpartum depression and psychosis. A physician advised the couple directly and unambiguously, do not have more children. The medical risk was too serious. Andrea's mental health had been placed under a strain that required stabilization and long-term management, not escalation. In November of 2000, Mary was born. She was the 5th child and the couple's only daughter. Within days of Mary's delivery, Andrea Yates attempted to take her own life again. She was hospitalized in a psychiatric ward. She was treated. She was released. She came under the care of a psychiatrist named Dr. Muhammad Saeed. In the spring of 2001, following the passing of her father, an event that caused a sharp deterioration in her condition, Andrea stopped taking her prescribed medication. She began what observers described as a feverish immersion in religious scripture. She stopped feeding baby Mary. She was rehospitalized. She was treated and released again. The family's living situation during this period was one that social workers and mental health advocates would later describe as deeply inadequate for someone in Andrea's condition. The family had at various points lived in a converted bus and a small trailer home. By the time of the tragedy, they were living in a house in Clear Lake City, a suburb of Houston. Russell Yates worked at NASA. In the weeks leading up to June 20th, 2001, he had made the decision, against the explicit instructions of Andrea's medical team, to begin leaving her alone with the children for 1 hour each morning, believing that increasing her independence would help her recovery. Dora Yates, Russell's mother, came each day to assist, but there was a window of time each morning when Andrea was alone with the 5 children. On June 20th, 2001, that window became the hour that changed everything. Russell Yates left for work at approximately 9 in the morning. Andrea bathed the children, or appeared to. What she actually did during the hour between her husband's departure and her mother-in-law's scheduled arrival has been reconstructed in extraordinary detail through testimony, court proceedings, and the confession Andrea herself gave to investigators. She filled the bathtub. She began with Luke, who was 2 years old. Then Paul, 3. Then John, 5. She laid their small bodies on the master bedroom bed after each one did not survive. Then she brought 6-month-old Mary to the bathroom. Mary was the last of the 4 placed on the bed, nestled in the arms of her brother John. Because, Andrea would later explain to investigators, John had been a particularly attentive big brother, and she wanted him to protect his sister in the afterlife. Noah was 7 years old. He was the oldest. He was old enough to know something was wrong. He came to the bathroom door and saw Mary in the water. He ran. Andrea caught him. Noah did not survive. He was left in the bathtub. Andrea laid Mary in the bed with her brothers. At 9:48 in the morning, Andrea Yates called 911. She told the operator she needed an officer. She did not say why. She called Russell at work and told him to come home immediately. When he called back and asked if anyone was hurt, she told him the children were hurt. He asked which ones. She said, all of them. Officers arrived to find 4 small bodies beneath a sheet on the master bedroom bed. Noah was still in the bathtub, face down. The investigation that followed, and the trials that came after it, exposed fractures in the medical and legal system that advocates for mental health reform have been working to address ever since. In her first trial in 2002, the jury rejected the insanity defense and convicted her of capital murder. The prosecution had sought the death penalty. The jury refused. She was sentenced to life in prison. In 2005, that conviction was overturned by the Texas Court of Appeals after it was revealed that a prosecution expert witness, Dr. Park Dietz, had given false testimony, claiming that an episode of the television series Law & Order had depicted a woman drowning her children and being acquitted by reason of insanity, directly implying that Andrea Yates may have been influenced by the show. No such episode had ever aired. In her second trial in 2006, a jury found Andrea Yates not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to Kerrville State Hospital in Texas, where she remains today. She has repeatedly declined to pursue the annual hearings that could result in her release. Her former husband, Russell Yates, has said publicly that Andrea was a wonderful mother who, without the devastating impact of severe mental illness, would never have harmed her children. Noah was 7. John was 5. Paul was 4. Luke was 2. Mary was 6 months old. 5 children who never had the chance to grow up. Their story has become one of the most powerful arguments in the United States for the expansion of maternal mental health resources, for postpartum psychosis awareness, and for the kind of comprehensive medical oversight that might have intervened before the unthinkable occurred. The Yates case did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in a system that was underfunded, understaffed, and under-equipped to handle the severity of what Andrea Yates was experiencing. Multiple physicians saw her in the weeks before June 20th. Multiple warning signs were documented. And yet the most catastrophic outcome was not prevented. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and the Postpartum Support International Organization both offer resources for mothers experiencing postpartum depression or psychosis. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out. The number for Postpartum Support International's helpline is 1-800-944-4773. Early intervention saves lives. This case is documented in full in the public records of Harris County, Texas. It has been covered by ABC 13 Houston, Biography.com, History.com, Annie Networks, and extensively in academic legal literature. Please like this video. Every subscriber tells YouTube that responsible, thoughtful content deserves to be seen. Ring that notification bell and be here for every case we cover. Case 4, Deanna Laney. May 9, 2003. New Chapel Hill, Texas. There is a small town in East Texas called New Chapel Hill. It sits in Smith County, not far from Tyler. It is a quiet, rural community, the kind of place where families know each other, where children play freely in yards and fields, where the local church is the center of community life. It is the kind of place where the events of May 9, 2003 would have seemed not merely unthinkable, but cosmologically impossible. Because the woman at the center of what happened that night was not, by any measure that her neighbors and congregation could have pointed to, a person anyone would have feared. Deanna Laney was 39 years old. She was a devoted member of the First Assembly of God Church in New Chapel Hill, where her brother-in-law served as pastor. She sang in the choir. She homeschooled her children. She was known throughout her community as a dedicated, loving, deeply religious mother. Her husband, Keith Laney, had no indication that anything was wrong when he went to bed on the night of May 9. Their 3 boys, 8-year-old Joshua, 6-year-old Luke, and 14-month-old Aaron, were, as far as he knew, safely asleep. What happened next is documented in the testimony of investigators, forensic experts, and Deanna Laney herself. At approximately 11:30 at night, Deanna Laney rose from her bed. She took Joshua, her oldest son, out to the rock garden in the front yard of their home. She lifted a large rock above her head. What followed left Joshua with injuries that were not survivable. She then returned and took 6-year-old Luke to the same location. Luke did not survive either. She then entered the house and went to the crib where 14-month-old Aaron slept. She used a stone and placed a pillow over the infant's face. Aaron survived, but with severe brain injuries that affected him permanently, including the loss of his sight and his ability to live independently. Then Deanna Laney walked approximately 100 yards from the house into a wooded area, still on the phone with the 911 dispatcher she had called. She was barefoot. She was wearing white pajamas that had been stained with evidence of what had occurred. She was calm. Officers who arrived at the scene found Keith Laney still in his nightclothes, having no idea what had taken place outside their home while he slept. The 911 tape began with a single, devastating sentence: "I've killed my boys." The investigation that followed was shaped by the absolute centrality of one question. What was Deanna Laney's state of mind when she did what she did? Because Deanna Laney had an explanation. She had been telling people about it for over a year. 12 months before that May night, she had stood up before her fellow congregation members at the First Assembly of God and told them that the world was coming to an end, that God had spoken to her, that she needed to get her house in order. No one had understood, at the time, what she meant. In the transcript of a conversation between Laney and her physician, recorded just 6 days after the events of May 9th, she described her experience in her own words. She described taking Luke to the yard and striking him with the rock repeatedly, telling God between each blow that she could not continue. She described seeing a flash of lightning at the moment she believed Luke had passed and interpreting it as a divine signal. She described returning to the house for Aaron. She described believing, with absolute conviction, that God had commanded her to do what she did, that she was being tested in the way Abraham had been tested in Scripture, and that her children would be resurrected. 5 psychiatric professionals evaluated Deanna Laney in preparation for her 2004 trial. 2 testified for the defense, 2 for the prosecution, and 1, Dr. William Reed, was appointed independently by the court. Remarkably, all 5 reached the same conclusion. Deanna Laney was suffering from a severe delusional disorder at the time of the events of May 9th, and she did not know that what she was doing was wrong. Dr. Reed, speaking later about his assessment, told the court that Deanna Laney's condition met the legal standard for insanity under Texas law, that due to a severe mental illness, she did not know her conduct was wrong. Dr. Philip Resnick, testifying for the defense, noted that when he interviewed Laney 6 days after the events, she showed an absence of emotional response and maintained that what she had done was correct. She believed her children would be resurrected. She believed she had fulfilled a divine command. Even the prosecution's expert, Dr. Park Dietz, the same forensic psychiatrist who had controversially testified in other high-profile Texas cases, confirmed that Laney did not know right from wrong at the time of the events. The jury in the Laney case deliberated for approximately 7 hours before reaching their verdict. Judge Cynthia Stevens Kent, who presided over the proceedings, later told reporters that the jury's decision rested almost entirely on the testimony of Dr. Reed, specifically because, as a court-appointed witness, jurors perceived him as a neutral party without an agenda. On April 3, 2004, Deanna Laney was found not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to Kerrville State Hospital for inpatient psychiatric treatment. Each year following her commitment, her case came up for evaluation. In 2012, after nearly 8 years of hospitalization, psychiatrists testified in a closed hearing that there was no longer clinical justification for keeping Laney confined. She was released into a structured outpatient program with strict conditions, regular home visits from caseworkers, mandatory medication compliance with periodic blood tests to confirm her medication levels, no unsupervised contact with minors, and a prohibition on changing her address without court permission. The community of New Chapel Hill has never fully processed what happened on the night of May 9, 2003. Joshua and Luke Laney were children of a church community. They were homeschooled by the very person who took them from the world. Aaron Laney survived, but was forever changed, living with the consequences of injuries sustained before he was old enough to understand what had happened. Their story is one of the most profound arguments for the importance of mental health intervention in religious communities, where symptoms of psychosis can sometimes be mistaken for sincere spiritual conviction. The line between faith and mental illness is not always immediately visible. But the cost of missing that line, as the community of New Chapel Hill learned, can be immeasurable. This case is documented in public trial records from Smith County, Texas, and has been covered by KLTV, NBC News, ABC News, and multiple academic publications focused on the intersection of mental health law and criminal justice. Joshua Laney was 8 years old. Luke Laney was 6. They deserved to grow up. They deserved the life their community thought they were living. Their memory is a call to action, to see each other more clearly, to ask harder questions, and to ensure that no family falls through the cracks of a system that should have intervened far sooner. Don't forget, please hit the like button right now and subscribe to the channel. We are building a community of people who believe that these stories matter, and that victims deserve to have their cases told with care and depth. Subscribe, like, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. Case 5, Dina Schlosser. November 22, 2004. Plano, Texas, a suburb north of Dallas. On November 22, 2004, Thanksgiving week in Plano, Texas, a 911 dispatcher received a call that would become one of the most disturbing recordings in the history of North Texas law enforcement. The caller was a woman. Her voice was entirely calm. In the background, clear and unmistakable, was the sound of a gospel hymn playing softly. The caller identified herself. Then she told the dispatcher what she had done. The name of the caller was Dina Schlosser. She was 35 years old. She lived in a modest apartment in Plano with her husband John and their 3 daughters. And what she calmly told the 911 operator that morning, confirmed within minutes when officers arrived at the Schlosser residence, was an act so incomprehensible that first responders at the scene would describe it as one of the most traumatic things they had ever witnessed in their professional lives. Dina Schlosser had used a kitchen knife to sever both arms of her 10-month-old daughter Margaret. Officers who arrived at the apartment found Dina seated calmly in the living room, covered in blood from head to toe, still holding the knife. A deep gash was visible in her own shoulder. In the next room, Margaret lay in her crib with catastrophic injuries. Emergency responders rushed the infant to a nearby hospital, where surgeons worked urgently to attempt to reattach what had been lost. The damage was too extensive, the blood loss too severe. Margaret Schlosser, 10 months old, did not survive. As officers led Dina Schlosser away, witnesses described her as completely serene. She was humming. Between verses, she was reported saying, "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord." To understand how this moment arrived, you have to go back years, because what happened in that Plano apartment on a November morning was not an event that came out of nowhere. It was the catastrophic endpoint of a journey that had been marked by crisis after crisis, by warning signs that were visible to multiple people and multiple institutions, and by a set of religious beliefs that had become tangled inseparably with a deteriorating mental state. Dina Schlosser, born Dina Leitner in 1969, had an unusual medical history from childhood. At the age of 8, she was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, a condition in which fluid accumulates in the brain. Before the age of 13, she had undergone 8 surgical procedures to implant shunts in her brain, heart, and abdomen. She graduated from Marist College with a degree in psychology. By outward appearances, she had built a normal life. But when Dina and her husband John began attending a church called Water of Life, led by a pastor named Doyle Davidson, something began to shift. Davidson held deeply unconventional views about mental illness. He did not believe it was a medical condition. He believed, and preached, that mental illness was demonic, a spiritual problem requiring spiritual solutions, not medical ones. Under Davidson's influence, and with her husband's cooperation, Dina stopped taking the antipsychotic medication that had been prescribed for her after she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder with psychotic features. The consequences were swift and severe. Earlier in 2004, the same year as the tragedy, Dina had been investigated by Child Protective Services following a psychotic episode. CPS had issued an order that she was not to be alone with her children. Her sister-in-law had moved into the home to comply with that requirement. Eventually, the order was lifted. By November, Dina was alone with the children again. Margaret was born in 2004. The day after Margaret's birth, Dina attempted to end her own life. She was hospitalized in a psychiatric ward and diagnosed with bipolar disorder with psychotic features. She was discharged, and in the weeks that followed, As her condition deteriorated without the stabilizing medication that her church discouraged, she began receiving what she described as divine communications. According to the testimony of Dr. David Self, a psychiatrist who evaluated Schlosser in the period following her arrest, she had come to believe that she was receiving direct instructions from God. She had seen a news segment about a lion attacking a child and interpreted it as a sign of the coming apocalypse. She believed that she was commanded, as Abraham had been commanded in Scripture, to make an offering. She believed she had been instructed to remove Margaret's arms, and her own head, and give them to God. The 911 call was made not by Dina but prompted by workers at a local daycare who had spoken with her earlier that day after her husband contacted them with concerns. The dispatcher who reached Dina at the apartment heard the gospel music. She heard the calm voice. She heard the confession. At trial, the case hinged on the Texas standard for the insanity defense, whether Dina Schlosser knew that what she was doing was wrong at the time she did it. Multiple psychiatrists testified about the depth and severity of her psychotic state. Evidence presented included the fact that she had told her husband approximately 1 week before the incident that she wanted to give the baby to God. Prosecutors argued this constituted premeditation, evidence of awareness. The defense argued it was simply further evidence of how advanced and all-consuming her delusions had become. The first trial ended in a mistrial after the jury deadlocked, 10 of 12 jurors voting that she was legally insane. A judge then reviewed the evidence and in April of 2006 issued the verdict, not guilty by reason of insanity. Schlosser was committed to a state mental health facility. A subsequent revelation added another layer to an already complex case. It was discovered that Dina Schlosser had a brain tumor. Defense attorneys argued this could have contributed to or exacerbated the hallucinations she experienced prior to the tragedy. The role of Pastor Davidson and the Water of Life Church in the events surrounding Margaret Schlosser's passing became a significant point of public and media attention. Davidson testified under oath that in his view, all mental illness is demonic at its foundation. Following the trial, the public outcry was significant enough that his television ministry was canceled everywhere outside the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. John Schlosser filed for divorce and was awarded full custody of the couple's 2 surviving daughters, on the condition that his sister live with the family and that he complete psychotherapy and parenting classes. As of December 2020, a court confirmed that Dina Schlosser remained committed to a state hospital, and a judge ruled it was in the best interests of all involved for her to remain in round-the-clock care. Margaret Schlosser was 10 months old. She had spent only a few weeks of her short life outside a hospital setting. She deserved every day that was taken from her. Her case became a landmark in discussions about the intersection of religious influence, mental health treatment, and child safeguarding, and about the responsibilities that come with counseling people who are experiencing severe psychiatric symptoms. The case also stands as a stark warning. When mental health conditions are managed with prayer rather than medicine, and when warning signs are filtered through a religious lens that reframes crisis as spiritual battle, the cost can be measured in the lives of those least able to protect themselves. This case is documented in court records from Collin County, Texas, and has been extensively covered by NBC News, All That's Interesting, and multiple mental health law publications. The National Alliance on Mental Illness Helpline can be reached at 1-800-950-6264. For anyone concerned about a child's welfare, the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services can be reached at 1-800-252-5400. If you believe that stories like Margaret's deserve to be told clearly, compassionately, and with full respect for the gravity of what occurred, please like this video. Your support is not just a number. It is a vote for responsible, meaningful true crime content. Subscribe today and hit that notification bell. Case 6, Lisa and Diaz. September 25, 2003. Plano, Texas. In the fall of 2003, the Dallas suburb of Plano was still processing the reverberations of Andrea Yates's case from 2 years earlier, still grappling with the questions her trial had raised about mental illness, about motherhood, and about the legal system's capacity to distinguish between criminal intent and psychotic break. And then, in September of that year, investigators were called to a home in Plano, and what they found inside suggested that those questions were far from resolved. The case of Lisa and Diaz would add another profound chapter to a series of Texas cases that shook the foundations of how courts, communities, and medical systems think about maternal mental health, about psychosis, and about the ways in which suffering, when it goes unrecognized and untreated, can metastasize into catastrophe. Angel Diaz had been at work all day on September 25, 2003. He arrived home in the early evening, around 6:30. He noticed immediately that something was wrong. The garage door was stuck halfway up. He crawled under it to get inside the house. He found his wife, Lisa and Diaz, 33 years old, standing at the door. She looked different. She told him, in a whisper, something happened to the girls. She said she had not wanted them to suffer. What Angel found as he moved through the house, described in accounts reported by the Dallas Observer and the Houston Press, was a scene that broke something in him that could never be repaired. 6-year-old Brianna and 3-year-old Cameron were found in the master bedroom, on the bed, covered with a blanket. They were unclothed. They were wet. They had not survived. Both had been held beneath the water in the bathtub of their own home. Lisa and Diaz had drowned her daughters. She had then gone into the shower and attempted to end her own life, stabbing herself multiple times with knives she had purchased at a Target store. She survived with wounds that required 37 stitches. Angel Diaz's call to 911 has been described by those who have heard it as one of the most raw expressions of a parent's devastation imaginable. His screams into the phone, asking dispatchers to hurry, telling them he did not know what his wife had done to his daughters, captured the utter destruction of a family in a single recorded moment. In the investigation and trial that followed, the central question, as it had been in the Laney and Yates cases that preceded it, was the state of Lisa Diaz's mind at the moment she took her daughters' lives. And what emerged from that investigation was a portrait of a woman who had been living inside a private psychotic reality for some time, entirely without diagnosis, without treatment, and without any of the intervention that might have changed the outcome. Lisa Diaz had not been under psychiatric care before that September day. She had not been diagnosed. No physician had assessed her. No social worker had flagged her situation. And yet, according to the testimony of 6 mental health experts who examined her in the months following her arrest, she had been experiencing severe delusions for an extended period before her daughters lost their lives. She believed that people in her neighborhood were watching her. She believed that evil forces had entered her home. She believed that voices were warning her that she and her daughters were going to suffer, slowly and painfully, if she did not act first. In her distorted perception, what she did was not harm. It was salvation. 6 mental health professionals evaluated Lisa Diaz. All 6 concluded the same thing. She had been in a profoundly delusional psychotic state at the time of the events of September 25, 2003. She had not known, in any legally or clinically meaningful sense, that what she was doing was wrong. What made the Diaz case particularly significant in the annals of Texas criminal justice was the extraordinary decision by investigators and prosecutors to create something that had not been done in the Yates or Laney cases: an extensive video record of Lisa Diaz in the period immediately following her arrest, before antipsychotic medication had stabilized her condition. Across 12 hours of footage, investigators recorded Lisa in a state that provided the jury with direct, unfiltered visual evidence of the severity and authenticity of her mental illness. The jury in the Diaz case deliberated for 12 hours. They were divided at the outset. The decisive element, according to reporting from the Dallas Observer, was the video record, particularly the moment when, on camera, Lisa Diaz was asked by an investigator if there was anything else she wanted to say. She looked up in anguish. "Because I miss them so much," she said. The last holdout juror, after the second day of deliberations, voted not guilty. Lisa and Diaz was found not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to Big Spring State Hospital, where she remained for over 2 years before physicians determined she was stable enough for outpatient treatment. In 2015, the Fifth Court of Appeals ruled that Diaz, who had changed her name to Lisa and Trevino, no longer needed to participate in court-ordered mental health services. She had been off medication since 2008 with no recurrence of symptoms. The Diaz verdict, following so closely on the heels of the Yates and Laney cases, intensified the political and legal debate in Texas about the state's insanity defense standard. Prosecutors pointed to her relatively brief period of hospitalization as evidence that the existing law was inadequate. Prosecutor Greg Davis said publicly that the jury would not have accepted the insanity defense had they known she would be released so quickly. He called for reform, for the introduction of a guilty but mentally ill verdict that would allow treatment without precluding accountability. At least 13 other states had already implemented such a standard. Texas had not. Brianna Diaz was 6 years old. Cameron Diaz was 3. They were little girls who loved their father, who waited each evening for him to come home, who had no knowledge of the storm raging inside their mother's mind. They did not survive that September evening. But their story changed how Texas courts, Texas lawmakers, and mental health advocates across the country think about what intervention means, and about what happens when it arrives too late. This case is documented in public court records from Collin County, Texas, and has been covered extensively by the Dallas Observer, the Houston Press, Fox News, and CBS Austin. Please like this video if you value the kind of serious, thoughtful coverage this case deserves. These stories are not just true crime. They are lessons that we carry forward. Subscribe now, hit the like button, and ring that notification bell. Case 7. Psycha Actor. July 19, 2010. Irving, Texas, a suburb of Dallas. There are 911 calls that investigators describe as straightforward. And then there are calls that the dispatchers who receive them never fully stop hearing, even years after the line went silent. The call that came into the Irving, Texas 911 center at 5 minutes past 5 in the evening on July 19, 2010 falls into the second category. The caller identified herself clearly. She was calm and direct. And the first words out of her mouth, words that would be played in courtrooms, in news broadcasts, and in discussions about mental health and caregiver support for years afterward, were, "I killed my both kids." Her name was Psycha Actor. She was 30 years old. She lived in an apartment in Irving, a suburban community in the greater Dallas metropolitan area, with her husband Rashid and their 2 children. 5-year-old Zane, 2-year-old Fariel. Both had been diagnosed with autism. In the recording of the 911 call released by Irving police the following day, Psycha Actor described what she had done and how she had done it with a degree of detail that left investigators and prosecutors shaken. She described first attempting to harm the children by giving them bathroom cleaner to drink. "I put it in their mouth," she told the dispatcher, "but they don't drink it." When that did not succeed, she said she looked for something else. There was a wire nearby. She used it to strangle both of her children, one after the other. "I just grabbed their necks," she told the dispatcher. Then they were no more. When paramedics arrived at the Actor apartment, both Zane and Fariel were unconscious. Zane was transported to a hospital, where he passed away that same evening. Fariel survived through the night, but did not recover. She passed away at the hospital the following evening. Psycha's husband Rashid met authorities at the scene. He was not charged. The case ignited a national conversation about the enormous and often invisible pressures faced by parents raising children with autism, and about the critical failure of support systems to reach families in crisis before that crisis becomes irreversible. In the 911 recording, Psycha Actor said something that became the most reported phrase from the entire case. She told the dispatcher she had harmed her children because they were autistic and that she wanted normal kids. Those 4 words cracked open a conversation that the autism advocacy community had been trying to start for years, about the catastrophic inadequacy of available support, about the social stigma surrounding autism in immigrant communities, about the isolation and exhaustion that can consume parents of children with complex developmental needs when no help arrives. Psycha Actor's uncle, Wasimul Hack, told the Dallas Morning News that his niece had been experiencing significant depression since the family moved to a new apartment in Irving. Zane, he said, had autism and a severe speech impediment, but had been making progress in speech therapy and was improving. Archana Durka, a Plano mother of a child with autism who spoke to CNN following the case, offered a perspective that brought painful clarity to the circumstances. She described the experience of raising a child with autism in a South Asian community, where the condition carries deep stigma, as profoundly isolating. Once you get a diagnosis, you can't be a parent, you have to be a case manager, she told the network. She spoke about the moments when the weight of it becomes overwhelming, and about the critical importance of having a support system in those moments. The Texas Department of Family and Protective Services confirmed that the Actor family had come to the attention of the child welfare system in 2009, when the parents were cited for leaving their son asleep at home alone while rushing their daughter to the emergency room. CPS had linked the family with community resources to help address the children's developmental and medical needs. But by July of 2010, whatever support had been put in place was clearly insufficient. Psycha Actor was arraigned on a charge of capital murder of a person under 6 years of age. Because both children lost their lives, she faced 2 separate capital murder charges. She was held in the Dallas County Jail on a $1 million bond. Her attorney, Richard Franklin of Dallas, took the case. In the years following the initial charges, legal proceedings in the Actor case moved slowly. The question of her mental state at the time of the incident became central to how the case was handled. Irving police confirmed that this was a case where the circumstances surrounding the children's developmental conditions and the caregiver's state of mind would be examined extensively. What the Actor case revealed, above all else, was a gap, a profound, dangerous, and entirely preventable gap between the support that families of children with special needs require and the support that existing systems were actually providing. Autism advocacy organizations across the country used the case as a focal point for renewed demands, for increased funding for respite care, for mental health services specifically designed for caregivers, for early and sustained intervention that did not wait until a family had already reached the point of crisis. Zane Actor was 5 years old. He had autism and a speech impediment, and by his uncle's account, he was making real progress. He was learning. He was growing. Fariel was too. They were children who, with the right support around them, had every chance at a full and meaningful life. The tragedy of their passing is inseparable from the tragedy of a support system that failed to provide what their family needed before it was too late. If you are a caregiver of a child with special needs and you are struggling, please know that help is available. The Autism Society of America's helpline can be reached at 1-800-328-8476. You are not alone, and reaching out is a sign of strength, not failure. This case is documented in Irving Police Department and Dallas County records and has been covered by ABC News, CBS News, and CNN. Don't forget to like this video. We cover these cases because they matter, not just as stories of tragedy, but as calls to action for communities, systems, and individuals to do better. Subscribe now, hit like, and turn on notifications. Case 8. Alexica Stevenson Gates. May 18, 2020. Red Bird Neighborhood, Dallas, Texas. 2020 was already a year of collective trauma for the city of Dallas. The COVID-19 pandemic had closed schools, shuttered businesses, severed social connections, and driven families into a sustained and often suffocating proximity within their homes. Domestic violence calls to the Dallas Police Department had been escalating steadily since the beginning of the year, 918 cases in February, rising to 1,169 in March, and reaching 1,202 by April. The Dallas Police Department's domestic violence unit was stretched, overwhelmed, and watching the numbers climb with rising alarm. On the night of May 18th, a Monday, just after midnight, a call came into Dallas 911 from the 500 block of Highcrest Drive in the Redbird neighborhood. The caller was a man. He told dispatchers that he had been in an argument with his wife. He said she had become upset and had opened fire on him inside the house. He said he had run out. He told them his 2 children were still inside. His wife's name was Alexica Stevenson Gates. She was 34 years old. She had been drinking. His 9-year-old daughter and 12-year-old son were in that house with her. What unfolded over the next 9 hours at 500 block of Highcrest Drive would become one of the most harrowing domestic violence incidents in Dallas's recent history and would end in a tragedy that Dallas Police Chief U. Renee Hall described in deeply personal terms to reporters in the hours that followed. Dallas SWAT arrived at approximately 2 in the morning and established a perimeter. Negotiators attempted to make contact with Stevenson Gates. After an extended period of communication and effort, they were able to negotiate the release of the 12-year-old boy. He came out of the house in the early hours of the morning, but Stevenson Gates refused all further attempts at contact. She barricaded herself inside the house with her 9-year-old daughter. As dawn approached, with no progress in negotiations and no response from inside the house, SWAT made the decision to enter. When officers breached the residence, Stevenson Gates fired at them from inside. 2 SWAT officers were struck. Both survived their injuries. SWAT retreated. Approximately 2.5 hours later, they entered the house again. What they found in a closet inside that home ended the standoff and added another devastating chapter to Dallas's record of family violence in 2020. Alexica Stevenson Gates had taken her 9-year-old daughter's life with a gunshot. She had then turned the weapon on herself. Both mother and daughter were found in the closet together. The little girl's name was Maloney Metoyer. She was 9 years old. Her biological father, Nolan Metoyer, was not present in the home. He and Alexica had separated after Maloney was born in 2010. When Nolan was reached by the Dallas Morning News in the hours following the tragedy, his grief was raw and disbelieving. He told reporters he could not begin to process the last thing his daughter might have been thinking in those final moments. He said Maloney was always happy to see him, that she always smiled. He had last seen her 4 months earlier, at the beginning of the pandemic, when the lockdowns began. Details reported by multiple news outlets in the aftermath indicated that the standoff had been preceded by hours of escalating conflict within the household, fueled by alcohol. A source close to the investigation told WFAA that during the standoff, Stevenson Gates had communicated a single chilling message to her husband, not to negotiators, not to officers, but to the man who had called 911 and fled. You know how this ends. Investigations by the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services revealed that there had been no prior child abuse investigations involving Stevenson Gates and her children. However, she had previously been arrested on domestic violence charges. The 12-year-old boy was placed with his biological father, Nolan Metoyer, in the hours following the incident. Chief Renee Hall addressed the media and the community with words that reflected both professional anguish and a deeply personal urgency. "We are fighting a pandemic," she said. "We are trying to stay alive. But then we kill each other. It is absurd. And I want the community to be more outraged about that." She spoke about the pattern she and her department had been watching develop throughout the pandemic months. The statistics, the case numbers, the relentless upward trajectory, and the human cost behind every single data point. The case of Alexica Stevenson Gates is, above all else, a story about what happens when family violence reaches a point of no return without adequate intervention. The pandemic had amplified tensions that already existed within countless homes across Dallas. The isolation, the economic strain, the disruption of normal support networks. All of it contributed to an environment where incidents that might once have had other outlets had none. The city had been seeing the numbers rise for months. And on May 18, 2020, in a closet on Highcrest Drive, a 9-year-old girl named Maloney paid the ultimate price for a crisis that many warning signs had pointed to long before that night. Domestic violence does not announce itself clearly. It escalates. It intensifies. And in a moment when the normal structures that might have intervened, family networks, community support, professional counseling, were all unavailable because of a pandemic that had upended everything. The consequences were irreversible. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out immediately. The National Domestic Violence Hotline can be reached at 1-800-799-7233. Calls are free, confidential, and available 24 hours a day. This case is documented in Dallas Police Department records and has been covered by CBS DFW, WFAA, Crime Online, and The Sun. Maloney Metoyer was 9 years old. She loved her father. She always smiled when she saw him. She deserved so much more time. Her story, and the story of every child affected by family violence, is a reason to speak up, reach out, and refuse to look away. Please like this video right now. These stories are why this channel exists. Every subscriber helps make sure that victims are remembered and that communities are informed. Subscribe, hit like, and ring that bell. Case 9, Tiffany Williams. June 27, 2022. South Dallas, Texas. At approximately 11:30 in the morning on June 27, 2022, crews from Dallas Fire Rescue responded to a call in the 2800 block of Silkwood Street in South Dallas. They were dispatched to assist an injured child. What they found when they arrived at that address was not an injured child. It was a 5-year-old boy who had already lost his life. His name was Zamorian Kizzy, and the details that investigators uncovered in the hours and days that followed his discovery would reveal a story of sustained, systematic harm inflicted on a little boy by the person who was supposed to love and protect him most. The child had visible signs of significant trauma on his head, his face, and his back. The severity and distribution of the injuries were, in the assessment of investigators, not consistent with an accident or a single incident. They were consistent with a pattern, with repetition, with daily abuse carried out over an extended period of time. Tiffany Williams, 26 years old, was the mother of Zamorian and 5 other children. The siblings, ages 7, 6, 3, 1, and 3 months, were removed from the home by Child Protective Services in the hours following their brother's discovery and placed into foster care. Williams was arrested that same day, June 27, 2022, on an initial charge of injury to a child causing serious bodily injury. What investigators documented in the arrest affidavit was devastating in its specificity. When detectives spoke to Williams following her arrest, she did not deny what had happened. She told them, in terms that were unambiguous and direct, that she had subjected Zamorian to physical abuse on a daily basis. She described striking him multiple times the day before he was found, hitting him in the temple and in the stomach with a closed fist. She told investigators she had also struck him multiple times in the face and across the back with an extension cord on the same day, causing injuries that were severe enough to be immediately visible to any observer. The arrest affidavit and statements reported by WFAA, CBS Texas, and the Dallas Express painted a picture of a child whose every day had been shadowed by harm that he could neither understand nor escape. He was 5 years old. He had no voice that could reach the outside world. He had no mechanism for communicating to a teacher, a neighbor, or a community member what was happening to him inside that house on Silkwood Street. He relied entirely on the people around him to either protect him or report what they knew. Neither happened. Child Protective Services confirmed to news organizations that the agency had prior involvement with the Williams family, though state law prevented them from disclosing the nature or outcomes of those previous interactions. The existence of that prior involvement, however its details remain protected, raises the question that haunts every case of sustained child abuse in which a protective services agency had already been present. What more could have been done, and what prevented it? Zamorian's father, Ulysses Kizzy, 74 years old, was also arrested in connection with the case, charged with injury to a child by omission, a second-degree felony. According to an affidavit reviewed by WFAA, Ulysses Kizzy had knowledge that Zamorian was being subjected to harm at the hands of his mother and had not intervened or reported it. In the years following the initial arrests, the case moved through the Dallas County court system. The charge against Tiffany Williams was upgraded to reflect the full severity of what the evidence demonstrated. She was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. The death of Zamorian Kizzy was not the result of a single moment of lost control. It was not a tragedy born of mental illness, psychosis, or delusional belief. It was the result of a pattern of deliberate, daily harm inflicted on a small child who had no way to protect himself and no one in his immediate environment willing to protect him on his behalf. That distinction matters, not because it makes the case more or less deserving of compassion, but because it demands a different kind of accountability. Zamorian Kizzy was 5 years old. He had 5 younger and older siblings. He had a family around him. And yet, within the walls of his own home, he was subjected to harm that no person, and certainly no child, should ever have to endure. His story is a reason to pay attention, a reason to notice, a reason to ask the child next door why they seem afraid to go home, a reason to make the call to Child Protective Services even when you are not certain, even when you think it might be nothing, even when you are afraid of being wrong. If you suspect a child is experiencing abuse, please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. Reports can be made anonymously. Your call could be the intervention that changes everything. This case is documented in Dallas County Criminal Court records and has been covered by WFAA, CBS Texas, and the Dallas Express. The conviction of Tiffany Williams stands as a record of accountability for the harm done to Zamorian Kizzy, and a statement that the courts of Dallas County will not accept what he suffered as anything less than what it was. If you stand with Zamorian and with every child whose story we tell on this channel, Please like this video. We will keep covering these cases with the seriousness and care they deserve. Subscribe now, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss a documentary. Case 10. Lisa Coleman. July 26, 2004. Arlington, Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. On the morning of July 26, 2004, paramedics responded to an apartment in Arlington, Texas, after receiving a 911 call reporting that a child had stopped breathing. When the call disconnected before the dispatcher could provide instructions, officers rushed to the Arbors of Arlington apartment complex. What they found there, in a bathroom, on the floor, was a child. He was wearing only bandages and a disposable diaper. He was so small, so slight, so diminished in appearance, that the paramedics who arrived at the scene initially estimated he was between 3 and 5 years old. They would later learn they were significantly underestimating his age. His name was Devontae Marcel Williams. He was 9 years old. He weighed 35 pounds. A pediatric physician who examined Devontae's remains would later testify that she identified more than 250 distinct injuries on his body. There were burns consistent with cigarettes or cigars. There were deep marks around his wrists and ankles where he had been restrained with plastic extension cords. The wounds infected, evidence of how long the restraints had been applied. There was a fresh tear in his lip, a healing wound where his ear met the side of his head. A blood stain was found on a golf club inside the home. In the words of one of the prosecutors who would later stand before a jury and describe what Devontae had endured, there was not an inch on his body that had not been subjected to harm. Devontae Williams had been born on June 13, 1995. By the time of his passing at the age of 9, he had spent years living in a situation that child welfare investigators had visited multiple times and had repeatedly failed to resolve in a way that kept him safe. The woman charged with his suffering and his death was Lisa Ann Coleman. She was 29 years old at the time of the crime, 30 at the time of her trial. She was the romantic partner of Marcella Williams, Devontae's mother. The two women shared the Arlington apartment where Devontae spent his final years. The history of the state's involvement with Devontae Williams is one of the most troubling aspects of this already deeply troubling case. In 1999, 5 years before his death, Child Protective Services had removed Devontae from Marcella's custody specifically because Lisa Coleman was harming him. CPS issued a direct order. Devontae was to be returned to his mother only on the condition that he not be in the presence of Lisa Coleman. That order was ignored. Coleman continued to live with the family, and the harm continued. Between November and December of 2002, CPS investigators visited the Williams home 9 times to follow up on allegations of physical neglect involving Devontae. Not once did they find anyone home. By the time of those visits, Coleman and Marcella Williams had withdrawn Devontae from school, stopped taking him to medical appointments, and were, in the assessment of investigators, deliberately keeping him hidden. His first-grade teacher at Webb Elementary School in Arlington testified about his earlier behavior at school, but by that point, he had not been seen in school for years. In the months leading up to July of 2004, Devontae Williams was not growing. Physically, he had stopped developing. A pediatric specialist later testified that malnutrition had caused his body to stop growing, and that the severe restriction of food he had experienced had produced physical effects consistent with prolonged starvation. He was 9 years old and weighed roughly half of what a healthy 9-year-old should weigh. When paramedics first saw him on that bathroom floor, they could not believe they were looking at a child who was school-aged. The investigation revealed that both Coleman and Marcella Williams had, on multiple occasions, tied Devontae's hands and feet with extension cords. Coleman admitted during the investigation to having applied physical discipline to the child with a belt. She also admitted that she and Marcella had bound him on several occasions. Devontae's younger sister Destiny, who had been adopted by the time of the trial, testified that Coleman had tied Devontae up with an extension cord. Medical testimony confirmed that the ligature marks on his wrists and ankles were not recent. They reflected a pattern of restraint that had been ongoing for an extended period. Marcella Williams, as Devontae's biological mother, was also charged with capital murder. She entered a guilty plea in 2006 to avoid facing the death penalty at trial and was sentenced to life in prison. She will not be eligible for parole until 2044. Lisa Coleman was tried separately. The prosecution brought a capital murder charge based on a two-part argument: that Devontae had been subjected to prolonged harm, and that the act of confining him in the apartment and preventing him from having contact with the outside world or receiving medical care constituted kidnapping under Texas law, which, when paired with the harm that resulted in his passing, elevated the charge to capital murder. The jury deliberated for 56 minutes before returning a guilty verdict. Coleman was sentenced to death. Her attorneys appealed the sentence extensively, arguing primarily that the kidnapping aggravator, the legal mechanism that made the crime capital eligible, was not properly applicable. They contended that confining a child in his own home did not constitute kidnapping in the legal sense. The argument was considered by multiple courts, including the United States Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which acknowledged that the kidnapping charge was the weakest component of the capital case, but ultimately declined to overturn the verdict. On September 17, 2014, Lisa Ann Coleman was executed by lethal injection at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's Huntsville unit. She was 38 years old. She was the sixth woman to be executed in the state of Texas since 1982. In her final statement, she expressed love for her family and her son. She said, "God is good." She said she was done. Her time of death was 6:24 in the evening. The case of Devontae Williams and Lisa Coleman is not simply a story about two individuals. It is a story about a child who reached out for help through every channel available to him, through the teachers who saw him in his early years, through the child welfare investigators who were sent to his home, through the neighbors who watched him come and go from the apartment complex, and was not reached in time. It is a story about how systems designed to protect children can fail even when they are actively involved in a case, even when the danger has already been identified and documented. It is also a story about accountability, about what it means for a justice system to look at the evidence of what a child endured and to say, "This will not go unanswered." Lisa Coleman was executed. Marcella Williams is serving a life sentence. The courts of Texas looked at what happened to Devontae Williams and made a determination that the weight of what he suffered demanded the most serious response the law allows. Whether that response was proportionate, whether the specific legal mechanism used to elevate the charges was the right one, remains a subject of debate among legal scholars and criminal justice advocates. But what cannot be debated is the reality of what Devontae Williams experienced. He was a 9-year-old child who weighed 35 pounds. He had more than 250 injuries on his body, and he had been known to the child welfare system for years before the day those paramedics arrived at that Arlington apartment. His story is a call, a clear, urgent, unambiguous call, for every adult in every community to take seriously the responsibility we carry toward the children around us, to report what we suspect, to push back when systems fail to act, to understand that in the absence of intervention, silence can carry a cost that no child should pay. Devontae Marcel Williams was born on June 13, 1995. He passed on July 26, 2004. He was 9 years old. He deserved to live a long, safe, loved life. His story will not be forgotten here. This case is fully documented in Tarrant County Criminal Court records, Texas Department of Criminal Justice execution records, and has been covered in depth by the Texas Tribune, CBS Texas, Wikipedia, and Murderpedia. The execution of Lisa Coleman is a matter of public record. For anyone with concerns about a child's welfare or safety, the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services operates a statewide abuse hotline at 1-800-252-5400. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is available nationwide at 1-800-422-4453. Please do not hesitate to call. Devontae Williams needed someone to make that call. Your call could be the one that saves a child's life. Every case presented in this video represents real people, real children who deserve protection, real families whose lives were forever altered, and real communities left to reckon with questions that do not have easy answers. We cover these stories not to sensationalize them, but to ensure that the victims are never forgotten, and that the lessons their cases carry reach every person who watches. If you have made it to the end of this documentary, please take one moment right now to like this video, leave a comment below, which case stayed with you the most. Your engagement helps this channel reach more people and ensures that stories like these are seen by the widest possible audience. Share this video with someone who cares about justice. And be here for the next case. Subscribe, like, Hit that notification bell. And thank you for watching.